Shot in the back, and it exited his chest.
Lieutenant Kenda is on the hunt for a faceless gunman with a mysterious motive.
Our question is, why did this happen?
Did he make somebody mad? Was he at the wrong place at the wrong time?
That name hit me like a slap in the face.
Yo, come out, we're coming in!
Then, an attempt to settle a score turns fatal.
Do I know you? Whoa!
Jealousy and rage and possession. It's a pretty bad cocktail.
Murder's like the economy. It goes up and down. You have good years, bad years. Something I've always found interesting, when murder is down somewhere, it's down everywhere. It's almost as if there is a national biorhythm. But could I explain that? No.
Clyde Williams and Barry Loggins were driving home after a 4th of July get-together. It was a nice summer night. They had the windows down.
July 4th in Colorado Springs area, there's a lot of people out celebrating early, celebrating late, running fireworks all the time.
Bro, I'm so psyched about this weekend. You're going to Bobby's party, right?
For sure.
Nice. Man, them Roman candles he got, gonna be awesome. Dude, what the hell is this guy doing? God, help me. Please. Yo, what happened, man? Oh my God. What are we gonna do?
They see that he's been shot. This guy is in bad shape. He's bleeding profusely, and he subsequently loses consciousness.
Oh no, dude. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Somebody help. Call 911 now.
Is he okay?
Call 911.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
"30 minutes later, Kenda steps out onto East San Miguel.
Hey, Mike, so what do we got? The Vic is 27-year-old Donald Zampa, shot once in the back. He's currently at Memorial Hospital in critical condition.
Donald Zampa is 27 years old. He's only been in Colorado Springs for a few months, and he is a maintenance worker at a local motel.
Any witnesses? The two guys that found him didn't see anything. Now, we are currently canvassing the neighborhood as we speak. This our guy right here, huh? Yeah, right there.
The crime scene itself is bloodstained, of course, and there's some medical waste laying around, and also the shirt and sport coat worn by the victim. It is unusual to find someone wearing a sport coat and tie in this neighborhood at 2:30 in the morning. So where did he come from, and where was he going to, and what interrupted that?
Now, the slug is over here. CSI said it looks like a 38. So it went right through him, huh? Yeah.
He's been shot in the back, and it exited his chest.
Could have been a robbery. Did you find any money on him? You know, I thought the same thing, except that his wallet's still in his pants right there, with 20 bucks still in it. Huh.
Well, that's strange. If this is a robbery, why wouldn't they have taken his wallet?
It could be an intentional assault against Donald Zampa for some reason, some perceived wrong he's committed against someone, some enemy of his. At this point, we have many more questions than we have answers.
Hey, Sergeant. Got the kid that called in the shooting if you want to speak to him.
Sure, where is it?
It's right down here.
Chris Powell is a white male, about 18 years old, kind of small in stature.
Can you tell us what you're doing out here tonight?
Well, I wasn't out. I was at my buddy's place down the street.
What were you doing there?
I'm staying there. I came from Ohio, so I'm kind of figuring out the job situation. You know, it's really hard these days.
Yeah, I understand. But tonight, how'd you end up calling the police?
He tells us that he hears a gunshot. He looks out, he sees the victim down and sees two other people running up to him to help.
So I figured the best thing to do was call you guys.
So you didn't see the shooter or anyone suspicious?
No, sir.
You look extremely nervous, Mr. Powell. Is there more to this story that you're not telling us?
Is everything all right, Chris?
Yeah, I'm fine. It was just crazy to see, that's all. Is that guy gonna be okay?
We don't know. Thank you. He was awfully nervous. Sure was.
Here's an 18-year-old, probably has never seen somebody shot. He may not be hiding anything, but we, being cops, are going to question that.
Hey, Sergeant. We just got word from the hospital. The victim's conscious.
Okay, good. I'm gonna take a ride over to Memorial. I want you to go ahead and supervise the rest of the canvas. I'll be right back. You got it.
This is good for us. There might be something he could tell us that'll help clear up this matter.
Excuse me, can I have a minute with him?
Sure. We need to make it quick. He's not out of the woods yet. We're prepping him for another surgery.
The victim in this case is shot in the back. It's a perforating gunshot wound and ends up going out the chest. So anytime you have somebody who's got a perforating gunshot wound in the chest or abdomen, there's a lot of very important organs that are between the entrance and the exit wound. Those cases are immediately life-threatening, and they have to be treated that way. You're going to start bleeding. You're going to have significant pain. You may not be able to breathe really well. All those things can contribute to loss of consciousness. When a bullet passes through a body, it's going to cause damage not only in the organs it pokes holes in, but it can also cause damage other places as this big pressure wave goes through the body. So number one, you're worried about bleeding. Two, significant injuries to vital organs like lungs and heart. Even if you survive the initial period, you're not out of the woods yet because there's a significant risk of infection that's going to be created by these injuries. There's a lot of things, obviously, that have to go right for you to be able to survive.
This may be the last opportunity for Donald Zampa to say anything, because if he doesn't survive the surgery, then the only statement we're going to get is what we're going to get right now.
Donald, I'm Sergeant Kenda. How you feeling?
I've been better.
I'm sure. Listen, I need you to remember everything you possibly can about what happened tonight.
Okay. I went to Graham's for a drink and to watch the game.
Graham's was more of a neighborhood bar where people hung out. People knew each other, and Donald was a regular customer.
He tells us that he left the bar and he was walking home. As he's walking, he hears somebody yell at him.
Don't turn around.
Whoa, man.
And he feels what he believes to be a gun pushed into his back.
Keep your hands up and get on your knees.
Come on, man. Easy. I had no idea what was happening, so I just did whatever the guy told me. But then as soon as I knelt down, I heard this loud crack and my chest got hot. Then everything went numb and I couldn't move.
So, of course, we asked Donald, do you have enemies? Is there somebody out to get you? He said, oh, no, I don't make enemies. I make friends. So that eliminates the possibility of most likely a known person to him. This is someone that doesn't know him at all.
Now, I know you said you had your back to the shooter, but did you see him at all or have any idea what he looks like?
No. Even if I did, I don't think it would have mattered much. Without my glasses, I'm legally blind.
Sergeant, it's time to head out.
All right, just one more question. Is there anything at all you can remember about this guy?
Yeah, actually. He had an accent, maybe like a Hispanic accent.
All right, well, thank you.
Sorry, Kenda.
I understand.
Kenda heads back to the crime scene with troubles on his mind.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what do we know? Is he an Hispanic male? Probably. Does he know Donald Zampa? Probably not. We have very little to go on here. Very little indeed.
Mike? Hey, Kenda. You get anything at the hospital? No, I didn't get much. It says the shooter sounds Hispanic. That's funny. We got a witness who says he saw the shooter, thinks he looks Hispanic. Really?
Well, now, maybe that's our guy. That's the first interesting thing I've heard tonight. We're working on the shooting of 27-year-old Donald Zampa. All we know is his shooter sounded Hispanic. But now we have a witness who claims to have seen the shooter. Our witness is Edward Esterly. He's living immediately adjacent to the scene.
We were told you saw something tonight?
He reports that he has been up and down during the night because in the last several days, they've been having problems in this neighborhood with break-ins of cars.
When I looked out the window to check on my car, I saw this Hispanic guy looking into it. But when I got outside, the guy was gone. And then I heard the gunshot, and I got the hell out of there.
So could that mean that this Hispanic male was looking to steal something out of cars? And at that moment, he notices Mr. Zampa strolling down the street. And does he decide he needs to remove a potential witness?
Don't turn around. Keep your hands up and get on your knees.
What this guy look like?
He was definitely Hispanic, I guess 25 to 30 years old.
You remember what he was wearing?
Yeah, he had on this weird-looking Hawaiian shirt.
Hawaiian shirt.
Is this guy possibly the suspect? We don't know, but that's where we're headed at this point.
Hey, Sarge. Hey, we still got a guy matching that description.
Where is he?
He's in the cruiser.
Thanks for your help.
Well, could this be our mysterious man?
Step out.
Tell us your name.
Miguel Diaz.
He does not have a Hispanic accent. He has no discernible accent whatsoever.
That really kind of blows our theory out of the water, but we still look into him.
So what are you doing out here tonight, Miguel?
I was on my way home, and I heard a couple guys shout that someone got shot. Saw the guy lying on the street, so I ran off, found a payphone, called 911.
You check on that for us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, we got some reports of a guy in a Hawaiian shirt peering into vehicles. Can you tell me about that?
I just really like cars. Checks out.
We were able to confirm that he had called 911 to report this crime. So his story is holding true. Maybe he's a BMV suspect and not a murder suspect.
Okay, Miguel. You're free to go. Just make sure we get his name to burglary, okay?
You got it.
So we're still at the beginning. Who confronted Donald Zampa? It wasn't Miguel. Then who was it?
Over the next few days, no new leads materialize.
Everyone we've encountered so far who could be, might be the guy is not the guy. The only good news is Zampa continues to live.
So in a case like this, to have a gunshot wound that goes through your back and then out your chest, it's really a miracle that an organ or the spinal cord wasn't struck. Every organ's right next to each other. So to make it from one side to the other without hitting one of those and killing you is a matter of inches that saves this man's life.
Well, as police are getting frustrated about the lack of leads in this case, they do get some good news, and that's that Donald did well in surgery and he's going to survive. So that's great. But this is going to be something that changes his life forever. He's probably obviously going to suffer the physical effects of what happened to him, but emotionally, can you imagine the fact that not only did this happen to me, but whoever did it to me is still out there, hasn't been found. They still don't know why it happened to me. It'd be the kind of thing that probably for the rest of your life, you'd always be looking over your shoulder, wondering, could something like this happen to me again? It would be a very fearful, life-changing experience that, yes, I recovered from it physically, I survived, but emotionally, it's always going to be in my mind and a part of my life.
But an unexpected tip is about to send the case in a whole new direction.
Sir, there's a call for you. Somebody from Cincinnati. Want to talk about the Zampa case?
Cincinnati? Which line?
2.
It is unusual to get a call from another state about a case that's only a few days old in your city. That is a real indicator that whoever is on the other end of that phone has some direct knowledge.
Sergeant Kenda, who am I speaking to?
Hello, sir. Yes, my name's Charles Norton. I'm calling because my stepson has something he needs to talk to you about regarding the shooting the other night.
And who's your stepson?
His name is Chris Powell.
Chris Powell, huh?
That name hit me like a slap in the face. You mean the nervous little kid that was at the crime scene?
Hello?
We were suspicious at the time that Mr. Powell knew more than he was saying, and we were right. So the phone rings, and it's a call from Cincinnati, Ohio, and it is a wealth of information.
Chris, this is Sergeant Kenda. You remember me?
Yes.
And you have something you need to tell me?
Christopher.
You can hear in the background his stepfather basically saying, you either tell the truth or you're out on your ear and you have no place to go.
I didn't tell you the whole story.
I didn't think so, Christopher, so here is your second chance to be truthful.
The other night when I said I was at home, I was actually headed home with a friend of mine.
He identifies his friend as Rodney McFarland. He's 21 years old.
This McFarland, he's a white guy?
Yes, sir.
We're kind of questioning this because we're looking for a Hispanic male.
All right, so what happened?
Well, Rodney was driving.
No.
What's wrong, man? And as soon as we pulled up on the San Miguel, the car stalled.
Oh, no, come on, you piece of crap.
Rodney's upset because he didn't have any money to fix this car to make it run. And they both see this guy coming toward them on the sidewalk, wearing a suit and tie, and he's obviously drunk.
Look at this fool.
Rodney turns to Powell and says, I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to rob him and take his money.
Oh, you can't just rob the guy, you know? What if you get caught, huh?
Don't worry. This guy's my voice.
And he told me he was gonna speak in a Hispanic accent, so the guy wouldn't be able to identify him.
Chris Powell's explanation for the accent gives newfound credibility to his story.
The only person who knew that was the victim, and the only way you could know it is if you were standing there like you said you were. I absolutely believe Mr. Powell has come forward finally with the truth.
So what happened next?
Well, he ran up to the guy. I heard a bang, and I just started running. You know, now listen, I tried to do the right thing, you know, by calling the police. It's just that I got a little scared afterwards. So, I'm back here with my folks in Cincinnati.
Chris wanted to do the right thing, and he maybe needed that extra support from his family to come forward and give that information.
Despite Chris Powell's story, there's still one detail that doesn't add up.
Do you know why Rodney shot the victim instead of taking his money?
I don't know. I couldn't even believe he did it.
So do you know where the gun is?
Yeah. He told me he keeps it in this, like, big case for cassettes. It's probably in his room somewhere.
Where's Rodney live?
We're able to obtain a warrant for the arrest of Rodney, and we go to that residence in an effort to execute that warrant.
You make an assumption that Rodney is armed and he's going to resist, so you approach guns drawn.
Wait, hey,
We're looking for Rodney McFarland.
my brother? He ain't here.
You sure about that? Harboring a fugitive's a felony.
Mr. McFarland, where is your brother?
If Joe Kenda tells you you're going to tell me where Rodney is, you're going to tell him where Rodney is.
He's in the back.
Step aside.
This is a very intense and high-risk operation at this point because he could be on the other side of the door just waiting for us to come in.
Hey! This is the police! Come out with your hands where we can see them!
If you don't come out, we're coming in.
And you won't like what happens next when we come in.
Let me see your hands.
I didn't mean to.
Go ahead and cuff him.
Rodney doesn't want to engage. He is just frightened.
Turn around. Where's the gun, Rodney?
I don't know. I want a lawyer.
All right, get him out of here.
Fine, that is your constitutional right, Mr. McFarland. But right now, you're going to jail.
Let's find that gun. Hey.
We do find the gun in a cassette case just as it was described.
This looks like a 38. Well, that's the one. this bag and get the hell out of here.
Although Rodney McFarland refuses to talk, ballistics testing on the gun does all the talking Kenda needs.
The gun is determined to be the weapon that fired the shot that entered and exited Mr. Zompek, and further, the weapon is defective. It would easily fire without touching the trigger.
It's a defective piece of crap, is really what it comes down to. And if you think about our case, it could very well be just that. The defective gun caused this to be a shooting as opposed to just a robbery.
Evidence of a faulty gun gives Kenda a much better understanding of how events unfolded the night Zampa was shot.
Damn it. Just try turning it back on. Look, it ain't gonna work. The hell am I gonna get the money to fix this damn thing?
He's complaining that this thing is nickel and diming him to death.
And Mr. Zompek comes walking down the street in his coat and tie, and looks like he might have a few dollars on his person. McFarland has no knowledge of who Donald Zampa is or cares. He is a victim of opportunity.
Look at what he's wearing. He's definitely got some cash on him. Hey, whoa, what the hell, man? What are you doing? Don't worry. This guy's my voice. Wait, Rod, stop. Don't turn around. Whoa.
And Rodney McFarland is not Hispanic by any stretch of the imagination, but he used that accent to throw off the victim.
Keep your hands up and get on your knees. Come on, man. Okay. Now give me
It's an accidental discharge. McFarland is shocked that the gun goes off.
God, help me. Please.
No robbery is attempted. Now it's run away.
It wasn't his intent. It was an accident, but it was an accident committed in the course of a criminal episode, which still makes it a crime.
Rodney McFarland pleads guilty to attempted aggravated robbery and is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Chris Powell is cleared of all charges.
There is a happy ending to this story, because even though Donald had all these cards stacked against him, he survived. He went on to fully recover and happily marry and have children and grandchildren. That would give you a whole new perspective on life, I think.
Armed robbery is one of the only violent crimes where the victims are selected at random. In the case of Donald Zampa, what was his crime? Being in the wrong place at precisely the wrong moment. He's just a very lucky guy. He lived through it. Many don't.
It's getting late, and delivery man Kirk Farrell is making his last stop of the night.
Kirk Farrell is a convenience store delivery man. He goes in late nights to multiple stores, takes out the old products, bring in the new products, and he hears two cars pull up.
Hey!
There's a sound of a disturbance, people yelling.
Hey, dude, chill.
The voices are getting more raised and the situation is getting more tense. And all of a sudden, he hears a shot.
He's not gonna shoot me. Stop!
He starts to take cover behind his truck. And at that time, he hears a second gunshot.
I'm sure he was scared and very confused. It's not like he can just call 911. He's going to have to go back into the store to do that.
Within the hour, Lieutenant Joe Kenda pulls up to the scene of the city's 23rd homicide of the year.
In 1991, we had an exceptionally high number of homicides for the size of city at that time. This particular case was one short of a record of 24 set in 1974.
Hey, Lieutenant. Hey, Gary. So what do we got? We got one shooting victim, 21-year-old Todd Iverson. Kid was rushed to the hospital, but pronounced DOA. Any witnesses? Got a couple, actually, including the shooter. He's already in custody and so's his gun. Really? Yeah, we got his friend over here in this cruiser.
It appears we have a major step up. We have the shooter and we have the weapon.
right, let's take a look at the scene.
We have a puddle of blood on the sidewalk in front of the main window of the store, which is apparently where this victim collapsed.
Toilet paper, huh?
Yeah, I got a t-shirt here, too.
Guy must have been hemorrhaging pretty bad.
Most likely, all of these items were used to stop the bleeding on the victim before medical arrived.
I got blood drops.
There is a pattern of blood moving toward the two cars in the lot.
Nice cars.
Yeah, our victim was a passenger in this car with his buddy, and our suspect was driving this car with a friend of his.
All right, I'm gonna take a look in the victim's car. Why don't you take the suspects?
You got it.
So you have two sports cars where speed and power are important. It speaks to the personality of the owner.
Is this something that could possibly lead to road rage? We've seen road rage be involved in a lot of deaths and a lot of murders. Not just accidental deaths where they crash, but one guy gets mad enough to where he actually shoots at another one. This wouldn't be the first time it's happened this year. We had another case in that same year where just that happened, a road rage incident, and a guy pulls a gun out and shoots somebody. So it's quite possible that these guys were either racing, got mad at one another, maybe one cut the other off, they're playing games with the cars. The idea of road rage really does come to play, or at least the thought of it does come up when we're starting this investigation. We don't know what's going on. There's a lot of possibilities.
Looking at the interior of the car, there's no evidentiary value, nothing covered in blood. It's most likely then that our victim is shot outside of his car.
Hey, Lieutenant, come take a look at this.
In the trunk, we find 41 expended casings neatly placed into an ammunition box.
What's the shooter's name?
Scott Sneed.
Well, Mr. Sneed obviously has experience with a gun.
It is not uncommon for people who routinely shoot. They recover their expended casings for purposes of reload.
Now check this out. Kid's on the Olympic Development Shooting Team.
No kidding.
So Scott Sneed has an unusual skill in that he is a very good marksman. And he's involved in kind of a pre-Olympic program here.
This kid's probably a better shot than all of us.
Yeah.
By the time they come out of that training program, they are scary good shots. Their rate of accuracy is just incredible.
So, Mr. Sneed is very good with a gun. If he is going to shoot you, he is going to kill you. And Mr. Iverson has discovered that the hard way.
Let's go see what he has to say.
My first impression of Mr. Sneed is he's a scrawny little kid. His identification says he's 18 years old. He looks like he's 12.
What were you and your buddy up to tonight?
Well, I mean, we were just out for a late movie, and we got hungry, and we knew that this was going to be the only place that was open.
He says they were just going to run in, grab some food, and head on home.
Man, I'm starving.
Me too.
Hey! That's a good... Yeah, what? Do I know? Whoa, hey, chill, bro. What's your problem? As soon as I opened this car door, this guy just rushed me out of nowhere. I had no choice. I had to defend myself.
Okay, do you know Todd Iverson? And why would he come at you like that?
I've got no clue. I've never seen that guy before in my life.
Okay.
The mere fact that Mr. Sneed reports that he doesn't even know this guy leaves an enormous shadow of doubt in his claim of self-defense. It is not common for perfect strangers to violently assault someone they don't know upon first contact.
Kenda wonders if Scott Sneed is trying to flip the script.
People shoot people deliberately and try to call self-defense. They lie about it.
Take him down the station.
Sir. Wait, am I going to jail for this?
I'll be done to talk to you later.
I didn't mean to hurt the guy, I swear, okay?
Why is it that Mr. Iverson is threatening Mr. Sneed if Mr. Sneed says he doesn't know Mr. Iverson? There has to be motivation. Somebody has to believe you're their enemy.
You want to talk to the kid who was in the car with Scott?
No, let's send him down to the station. I'll talk to him later. He's probably just going to back up his friend's story anyhow. I want to talk to the kid that was in the victim's car.
Kenda is hoping Todd Iverson's friend can shed some light on what the issue between Scott and Todd was all about.
So what's your name, son?
Joe Fleming.
How old are you?
I am 17. How's Todd?
Well, I'm sorry to say he's not going to make it.
When I found out Todd died, it was a shock. Just couldn't believe it. You know, unreal at that point.
And I know this is difficult, but can you tell us how you knew Todd?
Yeah, grew up together.
I met Todd in the neighborhood because I saw him riding by on a nice BMX bike. So I jumped on my bike and went out and got to talking from there and just hit it off.
But after Todd graduated, he moved to Arizona for trade school.
So what was he doing here now?
Just visiting. He got into town a few days ago. Tonight we were just celebrating him being home.
We're all pretty excited to get all back together again and hang out. Our group of friends were just real tight.
Tonight was awesome, man. I really missed you guys.
We missed you too. I told Bob I was gonna convince you to stay for good this time.
You can try. Hey man, pull over right here. Let's get more beer.
Todd's the liquor source. He's 21. He can buy alcohol.
When we pulled in, I recognized the car in front of us. Hey, that's Sneed's car.
Oh, really? Let's get him. I'm hungry, man.
Me too.
But that movie was really good. Yeah? Do I even know you? Oh, hey, chill out, bro. What's your... Hey!
Todd did throw a punch at Scott, but missed. Didn't hit him.
So what was the deal between Todd and Scott?
Todd?
Yeah, why did Todd hate Scott?
Todd, he doesn't even know Scott. I'm the one who hates Scott.
So we are thinking random act of violence doesn't make any sense. Well, now it makes sense. Now it makes perfect sense. We're investigating the death of 21-year-old Todd Iverson. We were skeptical when our suspect, Scott Sneed, said he didn't know Mr. Iverson, but maybe he really didn't know him. We need to rethink that.
So, Joe, you're the one who has a problem with Scott. What's it over?
Well, his girlfriend Nikki is best friends with my girlfriend, but he's no good to her.
Joe is not at all keen on how Scott treats his girlfriend.
The other night, he had Nikki crying, and my girlfriend calls him to tell him off.
My girlfriend was arguing with him over the phone, back and forth, and that's when I heard the threats.
He said he would kick my girlfriend's ass if she came between him and Nikki. I would have knocked him out had he said that in front of me.
Scott made me mad. I really didn't care for the way he treated his girlfriend and the way he was talking to mine.
At the root of all of this is the normal high school drama that goes on between boys and girls. It was nothing. Perception, believed slight, perceived bad behavior, all that sort of thing. That's all.
So if Scott's problems with you, why did Todd go after him?
I mean, I told Todd about Scott and all that he had done. And I guess he had had a few beers.
Todd understood that Joe didn't like Scott. And he's probably the leader of this little clique and probably the enforcer should something go wrong.
He was jumping out to protect my honor.
So what happened when Todd got out of the car?
Todd took a swing at Scott, and I got out to defuse the situation.
At that point, Scott had already pulled out a handgun.
Hey, back off, bro!
Whoa! Dude, come on, let's go, let's forget about it!
He fired a shot, went between us, which, you know, I backed off from there. I told Todd, come on, you know, let's not do this, but Todd stayed there.
I'm walking away. Next thing I know, I hear another gunshot. And now Todd's covered in blood.
At that moment, I was very upset. Did not have a reason to pull out a gun. Worst thing that probably would have happened that night was a little fight.
I understand how you feel. Thanks for your cooperation. Sorry about your friend.
Joe Fleming's story is eye-opening and ultimately lends credence to Scott Sneed's claim of self-defense.
Mr. Iverson is much bigger than Mr. Sneed. His size alone would strike fear into the heart of an 18-year-old kid.
However, there is still one issue keeping Kenda on the fence.
Now, a marksman like Scott's going to hit exactly what he aims for. And he shot him dead. I know. I think he would have shot him in a non-lethal area. And you know what? Maybe he did.
Where is this victim shot? It's a demonstration of intent.
As the sun rises, Kenda heads to the morgue in search of some answers.
So the bullet perforated his right lung. He died relatively quickly.
Okay, where was the entrance wound?
Well, that's what's interesting. The bullet entered at his right shoulder, hit the clavicle, ricocheted downward into the lung. See right here where it fractured the clavicle?
Yeah, that makes all the difference.
The shooter, in this case, a competitive trained shooter, can make that bullet go anywhere. And yet he selects the upper right shoulder. It is mere accident that the bullet happened to strike the clavicle and ricochet, lacerating the lung and killing the guy. Had that round been a half-inch lower or a half-inch higher, it would have been an entry-exit gunshot wound, treatable with the Band-Aids.
So Scott was intentionally trying not to kill him. All right, thanks, Doc.
Yeah, good luck, man.
Kenda now wants to talk with Scott to see if his story does in fact line up with what he's just learned.
I want to talk to Scott some more about precisely what he did when he decided to level that weapon at his opponent. That's the key to this case. That's the key.
How you doing, Scott?
Not so good. That guy died?
Yeah, he did. Scott, do you know where you shot Todd?
Well, I was aiming for his shoulder, but I mean, if he died, then... What, did I miss? I mean, it's like I told you before, I didn't mean to kill anybody, I swear.
I believe you, Scott. And no, you didn't miss.
He aims for a non-vital area. He hits what he's shooting at. But more importantly, he only fires one shot. He's not out of control. He's not emptying the gun into this guy. He is trying to stop his advance.
At this point, Kenda has a clear picture of what happened that night.
Two cars, by fate, by karma, by whatever means, show up in the same place at the same time. Mr. Iverson, at this point in his life, had enough alcohol in him to provide him with a motive to demonstrate his machismo. Oh yeah? That's the guy that did that? Well, I'm going to teach that boy a lesson.
Hey! Can I help you?
Todd tries to strike you. He actually misses.
Hey, chill out, bro. What's your problem? Hey, you want something? Hey, Todd, get off me, bro. Hey, back up, bro. Hey, what are you gonna do with that, huh? What are you gonna do? Back up!
Scott, in fear of his own personal safety, fires a warning shot to try to tell Todd to back off and stop.
Mr. Iverson, the victim, ignores. He continues his behavior.
Back up, man. Just forget about it. He's not gonna shoot me. Tell you, stop!
Mr. Sneed pulls up that gun and puts one in his right shoulder. It hits a bone and it ricochets exactly the wrong direction and cuts his lung in half and kills him.
He didn't give me a choice, man. He didn't give me a choice, man. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Come on, man. Come on. You're gonna be all right. You're gonna be all right. Hey, here. Go. Don't close your eyes. Wake up. Come on, go get something. This is not gonna be enough.
He did take his shirt off and throw it towards me.
Scott had a noble reaction. He really was trying to do what he could to undo what he'd just done.
He's not dancing with joy that he has shot his enemy. That certainly speaks volumes about Mr. Sneed's intent.
I can't believe I killed him. So what's gonna happen to me?
Well, we're gonna have to figure that out.
Scott Sneed is charged with manslaughter. But when the district attorney takes the case to a grand jury, they come to a different conclusion.
The grand jury comes back indicating that they did not feel that Scott acted in a criminal manner, but he acted in self-defense. So all charges were dropped.
Unfortunately for Scott, he couldn't overcome the magnitude of what happened that fateful night.
Mr. Sneed, as it turned out, at the age of 26, committed suicide as a result of depression.
Scott Sneed apparently was a very genuine young man. That's not to say he was perfect, but when he knew he had injured someone with his gun much more seriously than he ever intended to, he went to great lengths to try to help the young man, to help Todd, who was bleeding profusely. His conscience drove him then, and his conscience indeed might have driven him to his death, because even though the law called the homicide justifiable, he struggled with the death that he knew he committed. He shut down all of his practices. He shut down his dreams and his hopes to be a marksman. He was trying to punish himself, even perhaps, to take away something in his own life to somehow feel a little bit better about the horrible thing he did. He obviously was not able to succeed in getting past what he saw as such a horror at his own hand. Scott Sneed had a very strong conscience, and that conscience seemed to never let him go. I am sure that year after year he tried to put that remorse behind him, but that one horrible, bloody night took it all away from him. He became demoralized in the years after that shooting, and as a result of that, he also became very, very depressed. And it's quite likely that in an attempt to end all that, to rid himself of his emotional pain, took his own life.
It really is tragic that Todd didn't make it. It was also tragic for Scott. And, you know, a tiny bit of luck could have changed this so much.
If I had to do it over again, I probably just would have said, keep your eye on or something. Keep him around. He didn't have a chance to get married, have kids, you know, do the things that we're all doing now.
It's very sad, but it is what people do. And guys like me are forced to pick up the pieces, as it were, and sweep up the crime scene and turn to the rest of the public and say, next, because there's going to be a next.
The call came in just after midnight, slicing through the low hum of Sydney's western suburbs like a blade through fog, a woman's voice shaking on the line, words tumbling out too fast to hold, something about a house that wouldn't answer, a light still on, a door unlocked, and a feeling, a heavy, crawling feeling, that something inside had gone terribly wrong. By the time the first patrol car rolled into the quiet street, the city was asleep, unaware that a story would begin here, a story that would refuse to end, that would harden into a cold case, that would echo for years like an unanswered knock on a locked door. The house sat neat and ordinary, cream brick, trimmed hedges, a place that blended into the neighborhood so perfectly it almost vanished. And that was the first shock, because nothing about it looked like a crime scene, nothing screamed violence or panic, and yet the air felt wrong the moment officers stepped inside, stale, heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The television was still on, volume low, throwing pale blue light across an empty living room. A handbag rested on the kitchen bench, phone inside, keys beside it untouched. Dinner sat half-eaten on a plate, sauce congealed, the kind of detail that makes investigators pause, because people don't walk away from their lives like this, not without a reason, not without leaving a trace. Her name was printed neatly on the mail stacked by the door, familiar to the neighbors, familiar to the local cafe owner, familiar to the postman who'd waved every morning without fail. She was reliable, predictable.
She didn't vanish.
And yet, on that night in 2007, she did exactly that, dissolving out of her own home, leaving behind a silence so loud it rattled the entire street. By dawn, flashing lights had replaced sleep, and by midday, the word everyone feared had begun to circulate in low, Urgent tones. Missing. Police worked fast at first because they always do when the clock still matters, when hope is still warm. They photographed every surface, dusted for fingerprints that overlapped and blurred into nothing useful, logged every object that seemed even slightly out of place. There were no signs of forced entry. No blood. No struggle. Just absence, clean and terrifying. The back door was ajar, swinging gently with the night breeze, and someone noted it, wrote it down, circled it in red ink, because open doors are invitations and someone somewhere might have accepted it. Neighbors came forward in fragments, half memories stitched together by shock. A car engine late at night. Footsteps on gravel. A voice, maybe hers, maybe not. One witness thought they saw a vehicle parked across the street longer than usual. Another swore they heard an argument, but couldn't describe the words, only the tone, sharp, urgent, cut short. Each statement added weight, but none added clarity.
Sydney moved on.
Traffic roared. Headlines changed. But for the family, time slowed to a crawl, measured in unanswered calls and police updates that grew shorter, vaguer, heavier with every passing day. Within a week, the case had a name, the kind that sticks, the kind that follows detectives home at night. A missing persons investigation with suspicious circumstances. Within a month, the search zones expanded and then quietly contracted, helicopters replaced by paperwork, boots in the bush replaced by meetings behind closed doors. And somewhere in that shift, almost imperceptibly, the case cooled. The urgency bled out of it, drop by drop, until what remained was a file, thick with notes, thin on answers, stamped with two words that feel like a verdict: cold case. Years passed, and the house changed hands, repainted, repurposed, but the questions clung to it like smoke. What happened after that door opened? Who crossed that threshold and didn't belong? Why did nothing break, nothing spill, nothing scream? Detectives revisited the evidence again and again, hoping time had loosened its grip, hoping a detail once overlooked would finally speak. But evidence is stubborn. It doesn't confess easily. And in 2007, some of it didn't speak at all. There were suspects, of course. There are always suspects. A former partner whose alibi felt rehearsed. A coworker who knew her routines too well. A neighbor with a temper and a history of noise complaints. Each name rose, burned briefly in the harsh light of scrutiny, and then faded, unsupported, unprovable. Interviews ended in shrugs and legal smiles. Warrants came back empty. The city watched, then stopped watching, because mystery without resolution becomes background noise, a hum you learn to ignore. But not everyone ignored it. Some detectives kept the file close, pulling it out late at night, tracing timelines with tired fingers, replaying that final evening in their minds, wondering where the story bent, where it broke. They fixated on the small things: the untouched phone, the abandoned keys, the way the back door opened inward, not forced, not damaged. Someone had been trusted, or someone had been careful, or both. And that possibility gnawed at them, because it meant the truth wasn't gone, it was hidden. By the 10th anniversary, the case was officially unsolved, a statistic folded into a larger, colder list, but the community hadn't forgotten. They whispered about it at bus stops, in grocery store aisles, lowering their voices as if the answer might overhear. Parents locked doors earlier. Lights stayed on longer. The idea that a person could disappear without a sound, without a trace, had rewired the neighborhood's sense of safety, leaving behind a quiet, permanent unease. Then, long after the headlines had yellowed and the investigators had changed desks, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a movement in the dark, a piece of evidence re-examined with new eyes, new technology, new patience. An object once logged, boxed, and forgotten began to matter again, carrying with it the weight of every unanswered question, every sleepless night, every year spent waiting for a knock that never came. And for the first time since 2007, the cold case stirred, stretching, breathing, inching back toward the light, dragging the past with it, whether anyone was ready or not. The evidence room smelled the same as it always had: cardboard, dust, old paper, time itself. But the box no longer felt inert in the detective's hands. It felt heavy in a different way now, not with weight but with implication, because inside it lay the fragments of a night that had never finished unfolding, items tagged and numbered back, when mobile phones were thicker, when CCTV was grainy and forgiving, when DNA still needed a confession to matter. The label was faded, ink bleeding slightly at the edges, but the date was unmistakable, 2007. And beneath it, a name that had learned how to survive without a body. The decision to reopen the cold case didn't come with a press conference or a dramatic announcement. It came quietly, bureaucratically, triggered by a routine audit, a new forensic review unit combing through unresolved files with modern tools and modern patience, searching not for miracles but for margins, for the places where older investigations had been forced to stop. This case stood out not because of what it contained, but because of what it lacked. No weapon. No scene of violence. No clear motive. Just disappearance, pristine and cruel. And sometimes, that kind of absence is exactly where time leaves its fingerprints. They started at the beginning, because that's what cold cases demand, a return to the moment before assumptions calcify, before theories harden into dogma. They replayed the emergency call, the tremor in the voice, the pauses between breaths. They reconstructed the final day hour by hour, minute by minute, mapping movements across the city like a constellation that refused to connect. Work. Home. A stop at the local shop. A brief phone call in the late afternoon, unremarkable at the time but now replayed again and again, analysts leaning in, listening not just to words but to silences, to background noise, to what might have been happening just out of frame. The house was re-entered in memory first, then in reality. New investigators stood where the first officers had stood, imagining the furniture as it had been, the television glow, the half-finished meal. They measured distances again, re-photographed angles, traced the line of sight from the back door to the fence, from the fence to the narrow lane beyond. Nothing jumped out. Nothing screamed confession. But cold cases rarely do. They whisper. They hide in places no one thought to listen. One item, overlooked not because it was invisible, but because it seemed too ordinary to matter, became the focus. A piece of fabric. Small. Unremarkable. Logged as incidental. Found near the back door, caught on a nail, assumed to be debris. Lint. Nothing worth slowing down an urgent search for a missing woman. In 2007, it was bagged, tagged, and shelved. In the present, it was something else entirely. Technology had changed. The question wasn't whether it mattered anymore, but why it had waited so long to speak. Forensic technicians worked in silence, gloved hands steady, aware that this wasn't just a test, it was a conversation with the past. Fibers were isolated. Cells coaxed into revealing themselves. DNA profiles were built from fragments that once would have been dismissed as unusable. And when the results came back, they didn't scream certainty. They suggested it, hinted at it, nudged the case forward by inches rather than miles. The profile didn't belong to her. That alone was enough to shift the air in the room. Investigators returned to old suspects with new eyes, new data, and old patience. Some had moved on, relocated, aged into different lives. Some had learned how to answer questions better. Interviews were polite, professional, edged with tension. Alibis were restated, timelines reaffirmed. Most held. A few bent. One in particular began to fray under the quiet pressure of consistency checks and background verification. Not dramatic cracks. Subtle ones. The kind that only appear when time has lulled someone into carelessness. The community, unaware of the renewed activity, went about its routines, oblivious to the fact that the case they had buried emotionally was breathing again. But for the family, something changed. Phone calls resumed. Updates arrived, cautious but real. Hope, long-starved, returned carefully, like an animal testing unfamiliar ground. They learned to balance anticipation with fear, because reopening a cold case doesn't just promise answers, it threatens them. Investigators dug deeper into that final evening, pulling phone records that had once been too limited to interpret properly. Location data that used to be approximate now sharpened into patterns. One number, previously dismissed as irrelevant, resurfaced with context it hadn't had before. Calls clustered closer to the time she vanished.
Short.
Frequent.
Urgent.
And always from the same source. Not anonymous. Not unknown. Familiar enough to avoid suspicion the first time around. They cross-referenced work schedules, travel logs, financial records, building a lattice of movement and opportunity. A vehicle once described vaguely by a neighbor, dark, unremarkable, forgettable, suddenly aligned with registration data that hadn't existed in searchable form back then. The pieces didn't lock together yet, but they began to lean toward each other, pulled by gravity, pulled by a logic that felt inevitable in hindsight. Still, the central mystery remained untouched. Where did she go? A solved motive without a location is a half-truth, and half-truths don't close cases. Searches resumed in targeted areas once deemed too broad, too speculative. Ground-penetrating radar traced lines across soil that had changed hands, changed purposes, changed memories. Nothing surfaced. No remains. No definitive answers. The silence persisted, stubborn and absolute. Pressure mounted inside the investigation, not from the public, they still didn't know, but from the knowledge that the window was narrowing again. Evidence can age twice, once physically and once legally. Warrants require thresholds. Arrests require confidence. And confidence in a cold case is a fragile thing, built slowly, lost instantly. The team debated. Wait for more. Act now. Risk spooking someone who had learned how to stay invisible. Then came the break no one could schedule, the kind that never announces itself properly. A secondary analysis of the fabric yielded a secondary trace, partial, degraded, but enough to search broader databases that hadn't existed when the case was born. It didn't produce a name immediately. It produced a direction, a connection, a line extending outward from the past into the present, crossing paths with other cases, other reports, other moments of unease that had never been linked before. Suddenly, the disappearance wasn't alone anymore. It sat among a constellation of incidents, none identical, all unsettlingly similar. A pattern began to suggest itself, faint but persistent, and with it came a realization that chilled even seasoned detectives. This might not have been an isolated act. It might have been practice, or escalation, or something that had only stopped because it had succeeded once. As investigators prepared their next move, drafting documents, rehearsing questions, anticipating resistance, the city continued to sleep, unaware that a door long thought closed was about to be knocked on again, not by memory or rumor, but by law. And somewhere, someone who had lived comfortably in the shadow of a vanished woman felt that shadow shift, felt the temperature drop, felt the past, patient and relentless, begin to close the distance. The knock came in the early hours, not loud, not aggressive, just firm enough to carry authority through a closed door, and when it landed, it carried 14 years of silence with it, every unanswered question compressed into a single, ordinary sound. Inside the house, the man took a moment longer than necessary to respond, a pause so small it might have meant nothing, except that in cold cases, hesitation is a language investigators learn to speak fluently. By the time the door opened, the expression was already set, calm, almost curious, the face of someone who believed the past had finally lost interest. Detectives didn't accuse. They never do at first. They introduced themselves, stated their purpose with neutral precision, asked if he'd be willing to talk. He agreed, of course. Innocent people often do. Guilty ones sometimes do too, especially when time has taught them that compliance can look like confidence. Inside, the house was tidy, controlled, devoid of clutter, a place that suggested routine and predictability was something the investigators had learned to distrust. The interview room was small, windowless, designed to remove distractions, to let silence do its work. The man sat comfortably, hands folded, posture relaxed, answering questions with ease. He remembered 2007. He remembered her. He remembered the neighborhood, the routines, the way life felt back then. His timeline was smooth, rehearsed without sounding rehearsed, the kind of narrative that flows because it's been told before, perhaps only to oneself. Detectives listened, nodding, letting him speak, letting him believe he was guiding the conversation. They asked about his phone. He didn't flinch.
Phones were boring, he said.
Everyone had one. Records could be misleading. They asked about the car he owned at the time, dark-colored, unremarkable, sold years ago. He shrugged, smiled faintly, as if amused by the coincidence. People remember cars incorrectly, he suggested. Memory is unreliable. He was right. Memory lies all the time. Evidence doesn't, at least not in the same way. When they placed the fabric on the table, sealed in clear plastic, the room shifted. Not dramatically.
Subtly.
His eyes flicked down for a fraction of a second too long, just long enough to register recognition before discipline snapped back into place. Detectives didn't comment. They let the moment breathe, let it expand on its own. They spoke instead about advancements in forensic science, about how old evidence can learn new tricks, about how time, ironically, can make the truth easier to find. He leaned back, crossed his arms, smiled again. Interesting, he said. Technology is impressive. He asked if he was under arrest. He wasn't. Not yet. They told him they'd be in touch. And when he left, walking back into daylight with the careful stride of someone measuring each step, they knew one thing with certainty. The case had teeth now. Behind closed doors, the pressure intensified. The DNA profile, partial as it was, didn't give them a name, but it narrowed the field, intersected with the man's history in ways that felt less like coincidence and more like inevitability. They subpoenaed more records, dug into employment files, travel histories, unexplained gaps that had once seemed benign. A weekend trip that hadn't been documented properly. A sudden change in routine after the disappearance. A move, not immediate, but soon enough to suggest discomfort. They returned to the neighborhood, not with uniforms and tape, but with questions that sounded casual, friendly, designed to slip past defenses built on time. People talked. Time makes people talk. Old grudges resurface. Half-forgotten impressions sharpen. Someone remembered seeing him near the house that night, later than usual. Someone else recalled a brief argument months earlier, dismissed at the time as nothing more than raised voices. Nothing definitive. Everything suggestive. The kind of accumulation that builds quietly, then all at once. The investigators reconstructed the night again, this time with him at the center, a presence rather than a footnote. They plotted his movements against hers, watched the paths converge and diverge, saw the moment where opportunity aligned too neatly to ignore. The back door. The familiar face. The absence of forced entry. It fit. Too well. And fitting theories are dangerous, because they can blind you to alternatives. So they challenged it, attacked it from every angle, tried to break it. It held. Still, there was the problem that had haunted the case from the beginning. No body. No scene of violence. No definitive proof of what happened after she stepped away from the light of her own home. Prosecutors don't like ghosts. Juries like facts. And facts, in this case, were still assembling themselves reluctantly. The team knew that if they moved too early, they could lose everything. If they waited too long, they could lose him. They applied pressure indirectly. Financial audits. Re-interviews. Subtle reminders that the past was no longer content to stay buried. The man's demeanor changed almost imperceptibly over weeks, confidence giving way to irritation, irritation sharpening into defensiveness.
He hired a lawyer.
He stopped returning calls. Silence, once his ally, began to feel like a liability. Then came the mistake.
Small. Human.
A comment made to the wrong person at the wrong time, framed as a joke, a dark aside about how some people just disappear and never come back. It was reported.
Logged.
Contextualized. On its own, it meant nothing. In combination, it meant everything. It suggested familiarity not with loss, but with outcome. The forensic team, meanwhile, pushed the evidence further, extracting one more sliver of information from the fabric, enough to confirm contact, enough to place him within inches of her space on the night she vanished. Defense would argue transfer. Innocent explanation. Coincidence. The investigators knew that. They prepared for it. They layered the evidence, not stacking it high, but spreading it wide, building a narrative that didn't rely on a single fragile point. As the case approached a threshold, word began to leak, not officially, but through the subtle channels that always exist between law enforcement and the public. A cold case, people whispered. Something old, something big. Journalists sniffed around. The family felt it before they heard it, a change in tone, in urgency, in the way officers spoke to them now, careful but present. Hope returned again, heavier this time, carrying the weight of expectation. The arrest, when it came, was anything but theatrical. No chase. No shouting. Just a warrant, executed cleanly, efficiently. A man escorted from his home in daylight, neighbors watching from behind curtains, recognition dawning slowly, painfully. The headline would later call it a shock. For some, it was. For others, it felt inevitable, the end of a sentence that had been running on for too long. Charges were filed. Statements released. The words "cold case solved" appeared on screens across the city, accompanied by a date that felt unreal in its distance, 2007. But solved is a complicated word. It suggests closure, finality, an end. For the family, it was something else entirely, a reopening of grief, a confirmation of fears long held at bay. For the community, it was relief edged with discomfort, the realization that the danger hadn't come from outside, but from within, from someone who had lived among them, unnoticed, ordinary. And still, questions remained. Where was she? What exactly happened in the moments after she left her house? The accused said nothing. He watched the proceedings with a composed expression, eyes forward, hands steady. The past had caught him, but it hadn't loosened his tongue. And as the city absorbed the news, celebrating resolution while grappling with its limits, one truth lingered, stubborn and unresolved. A case can be solved on paper and still haunt the world it leaves behind. The courtroom was colder than anyone expected, not in temperature but in tone, a place where emotion was filtered into procedure, where years of waiting were reduced to numbered exhibits and carefully chosen words. The accused sat motionless behind the defense table, jaw set, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room, as if staring through time rather than at it. Cameras clicked softly. Pens scratched. Outside, reporters rehearsed headlines that promised certainty, even as certainty remained frustratingly out of reach. The prosecution began with the story they believed the evidence told. Not dramatic, not theatrical, but deliberate, paced, built brick by brick. They spoke of 2007 as if it were yesterday, of a quiet street, an open door, a woman who vanished without leaving a mark. They introduced the concept of trust, of familiarity, of how crimes without violence often rely on proximity rather than force. They laid out timelines, phone records, movements that overlapped too neatly to ignore. And then they brought out the fabric. It was small on the screen, magnified until every fiber felt enormous, a relic elevated to the status of witness. Experts explained how it had been found, how it had been dismissed, how it had waited patiently for technology to catch up. They spoke in careful language, acknowledging limitations, probabilities, margins of error. The DNA didn't shout his name. It whispered his presence. The prosecution leaned into that whisper, amplifying it with context, with behavior, with opportunity. The defense countered with doubt, as defenses often do when facts are inconvenient. They questioned chain of custody, suggested contamination, argued secondary transfer. They reminded the jury that proximity is not guilt, that coincidence is not confession, that time erodes clarity as much as it reveals it. They pointed to the absence that still defined the case. No body, no cause of death, no definitive account of what happened after the door closed behind her. They asked the jury to imagine reasonable alternatives, to sit with uncertainty rather than resolve it too quickly. Witnesses came and went, neighbors older now, memories dulled but still sharp around the edges. Some spoke with confidence, others with apology, admitting how little they had understood back then, how normal everything had seemed. The family listened from the gallery, absorbing each detail like a blow, because this was the closest they had ever come to hearing the night retold in full, even if it was still incomplete. Each mention of her name felt both grounding and unreal, a reminder that she existed beyond the case file. As days turned into weeks, the trial took on a rhythm, argument and counterargument looping endlessly around the same central void. The accused remained silent, exercising his right, letting his lawyers speak for him, letting the story be told without his voice. Some read that silence as calculation, others as fear. Silence, like everything else in this case, refused to settle into a single meaning. Outside the courtroom, public opinion fractured. Talkback radio buzzed with certainty and skepticism in equal measure. Some declared the case closed at last, grateful for an ending after so many years. Others bristled at the word solved, insisting that without her remains, without a clear account of her final moments, justice felt provisional, fragile. The city argued with itself, replaying the disappearance in collective memory, trying to reconcile resolution with loss. Behind the scenes, investigators continued to search, because trials don't stop questions, they sharpen them. New tips came in, spurred by publicity, some vague, some bizarre, a few unsettlingly specific. Each was logged, assessed, chased down until it collapsed under scrutiny or led to another dead end. The landscape had changed too much. Construction had erased potential sites. Time had rearranged everything. If she was out there, she was hidden well, protected by the very years that had finally brought her case back into the light. The verdict, when it arrived, didn't land like a thunderclap. It arrived quietly, almost gently, the foreperson's voice steady, measured, delivering words that would be replayed endlessly afterward.
Guilty.
Not guilty. Or something in between. Whatever the outcome, it carried weight that pressed down on everyone in the room, because verdicts don't just judge the accused, they define the story that will be told from that moment on. For the family, there was no clean victory. Even in the best possible scenario, they left the courtroom with the same absence they had carried for years. Answers had shape now, direction, but not completeness. They still didn't know where she was. They still didn't know exactly how her final hours unfolded. Closure remained a word other people used, not something they felt. The accused was led away, expression unreadable, past a public that now knew his name, his face, his connection to a disappearance that had once felt almost abstract. The ordinary life he had built unraveled quickly, replaced by a narrative he could no longer control. Whether he would ever speak, ever fill in the missing pieces, remained an open question, one more uncertainty layered onto an already complex ending. And as the courtroom emptied, as the microphones were packed away and the city returned to its routines, the case settled into a new state, no longer cold, no longer invisible, but still incomplete. A story with an ending that felt provisional, a truth that had emerged just far enough to be seen, but not far enough to be fully grasped. Somewhere in that gap, between resolution and mystery, the echo of 2007 lingered, reminding everyone that some cases never truly finish speaking, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many doors finally open. The sentence echoed longer than the verdict itself, rolling through the courtroom with a weight that felt disproportionate to the words used to deliver it, measured, legal, restrained, as if the law itself was careful not to promise more than it could give. Outside, cameras waited, hungry for a moment that would translate cleanly into certainty, but what emerged instead was ambiguity wearing the thin mask of justice. The accused was gone now, escorted through side corridors, swallowed by procedure, leaving behind a room full of people still grappling with the same central absence. For investigators, the case didn't end with the trial. It never does. A conviction without a recovery is an unfinished sentence, a narrative that refuses to resolve into a final period. They returned, once again, to the evidence, now armed with the leverage of guilt established, hoping pressure would succeed where patience had failed. They reviewed interview footage frame by frame, searching for the smallest fractures, the moments where composure slipped and something unguarded surfaced. They cataloged his reactions to specific questions, specific names, specific locations, mapping discomfort like a heat signature. Prison interviews followed, sterile rooms stripped of all but necessity, the accused sitting across from detectives who no longer needed to pretend neutrality. They spoke plainly now, outlining what they believed had happened, placing him at the center of a sequence he could no longer plausibly deny. They offered nothing theatrical, no deals whispered in shadows, just the truth as they understood it and the quiet suggestion that there was still one thing only he could provide. He listened. He said nothing. Silence hardened into strategy. The search resumed in earnest, guided by theories refined through trial testimony and behavioral analysis. They focused on places connected to him rather than her, because disappearances often orbit the perpetrator's world, not the victim's. Old properties, routes driven repeatedly, sites that had changed just enough to hide something permanently. Cadaver dogs traced patterns across land that no longer looked the way it did in 2007, reacting to traces that could mean history or could mean nothing at all. Ground was broken, then filled again. Each dig carried hope. Each empty result deepened the ache. The community watched from a distance, invested but unsure how to feel. Some believed justice had finally been done, that the city could exhale at last. Others remained uneasy, troubled by how much remained unknown. The idea that a person could be convicted of a crime whose final act was still invisible unsettled them, challenged their faith in neat endings. Conversations drifted back to 2007, to what they had been doing that night, to how close they might have been without knowing it. The family existed in a strange limbo, gratitude and grief braided tightly together. They spoke to the media sparingly, choosing words with care, because every statement felt like it might become permanent, etched into the public version of her story. They wanted answers, not attention. They wanted truth, not spectacle. And above all, they wanted her back, even if back meant certainty rather than presence. Rumors surfaced, as they always do when silence leaves room for imagination. Someone claimed to have seen him near the coast years ago, digging late at night. Another insisted a confession had been made in a moment of drunken honesty, then retracted. Each lead flared briefly before burning out, leaving behind the familiar smell of disappointment. Investigators chased them anyway. Cold cases teach persistence. Solved cold cases teach restraint. Time moved forward, indifferent to resolution. New buildings rose where empty land once stretched. Roads were widened. Landscapes transformed. With each change, the probability of recovery diminished, not because she was gone, but because the world had learned how to bury its own past. Evidence ages. Soil shifts. Memory corrodes. And still, the case exerted a quiet pull, refusing to release those it had claimed. In the end, what remained was not a single truth, but a constellation of them, orbiting an absence that could no longer be ignored. A woman who left her house one night and never returned. A man whose proximity became guilt, whose silence became its own kind of testimony. A city that learned, slowly and painfully, that mysteries don't always dissolve when answers arrive. They simply change shape. The file was closed, officially, stamped and archived, but its shadow lingered, stretching long across years that would continue without her. The house, the street, the back door, all still there, ordinary again, yet permanently altered by what had passed through them. And in that quiet, between what was proven and what was still unknown, the case settled into its final form, not as a question, not as a headline, but as an enduring reminder that some stories end not with clarity, but with echo. Years after the sentence, long after the headlines had thinned into footnotes and anniversary pieces, the case lived on in quieter places, in training rooms where new detectives studied old failures, in forensic labs where technicians tested the outer limits of what evidence could still give. It became a reference point, a lesson wrapped in tragedy, proof that time can be both an enemy and an accomplice, that what once felt unknowable can, under the right pressure, begin to bend. Inside the prison, the man settled into routine, days flattened into repetition, his name now permanently tethered to a disappearance rather than a face or a voice. He received letters, some hateful, some curious, some disturbingly sympathetic. He answered none. Silence had carried him this far. It was the only thing he still controlled. Psychologists assessed him, searching for cracks where remorse or compulsion might surface, but what they found instead was compartmentalization perfected, a mind skilled at sealing off one version of reality from another. Investigators returned periodically, not with urgency, but with persistence, checking whether time behind bars had loosened anything, whether isolation had done what confrontation could not. They varied their approaches, sometimes clinical, sometimes almost conversational, speaking of weather, of aging parents, of how much the world had changed since 2007. They watched closely for reactions when they mentioned specific locations, specific sensory details. The responses were minimal, controlled. If there was guilt, it was buried deep, protected by layers of denial and habit. Outside, the family aged into a grief that had learned how to function. They marked birthdays privately, anniversaries quietly, refusing to let the calendar dictate their pain. The conviction brought validation, but not peace. Peace requires answers, and answers remained incomplete. They pushed gently but persistently for continued searches, continued attention, knowing that pressure fades quickly once a case is labeled solved. They understood better than anyone that solved and finished are not the same thing. The case began to surface in academic circles, cited in papers on delayed forensic breakthroughs, on the psychology of offenders who rely on invisibility rather than violence. Students debated it, stripped of its human cost, reducing it to variables and outcomes. Some argued the conviction was inevitable. Others insisted it rested too heavily on inference. The disagreement itself became part of the legacy, a reminder that justice is often negotiated rather than discovered whole. Technological advances continued, and with them, new hope. Databases expanded. Algorithms refined patterns humans couldn't see. Old evidence was tested again, not because it was expected to change, but because change had become possible. Each test returned the same answer: proximity, contact, presence. Enough to convict, not enough to locate. The absence remained stubborn, immune to innovation. Occasionally, a tip would break through the monotony, carrying the promise of resolution. A former acquaintance remembering something out of place. A worker recalling unusual activity at a construction site years earlier. Each tip reopened wounds, mobilized teams, raised expectations. Each time, the outcome was the same. Nothing conclusive. The city learned to temper its reaction, to greet news of renewed searches with cautious distance rather than excitement. And yet, the case refused to fade completely. It resurfaced in podcasts, in documentaries, in late-night conversations fueled by curiosity and unease. People speculated not just about what happened, but about how close they might have come to it without knowing. The idea that the disappearance had unfolded quietly, efficiently, without spectacle, unsettled them more than any dramatic crime ever could. It suggested that danger doesn't always announce itself. The house where it began became a point of morbid interest, despite renovations, despite new occupants who had nothing to do with the past. Some nights, people slowed their cars as they passed, glancing toward the back door, imagining the moment when ordinary life fractured into mystery. The place resisted meaning, insisting on its ordinariness, and that insistence was part of what made the story linger. For the investigators who had carried the case the longest, retirement came with mixed emotions. They left knowing they had done what they could, pushed as far as the evidence allowed. They also left knowing that the final answer remained out of reach. Some cases close. Others simply stopped moving. This one hovered in between, resolved in law, unresolved in fact. As time stretched on, the question shifted. It was no longer just what happened that night, but whether the truth, in its entirety, would ever surface. Whether the man would speak. Whether the land would give something back. Whether certainty would ever replace probability. The city learned to live with that uncertainty, folding it into its collective memory, a quiet reminder that not all wounds heal cleanly. And in that long after, when urgency had been replaced by endurance, the case took on its final, enduring shape, not a mystery demanding attention, but an absence that refused to be filled, a story that had reached its legal conclusion, but not its emotional one. A cold case that had been solved on paper, yet remained, in every way that mattered, unfinished. The years layered themselves quietly over the case, smoothing its sharpest edges without ever erasing them, until it became less a headline and more a presence, something the city carried without consciously acknowledging. It surfaced unexpectedly, in conversations about safety, in debates about justice, in the way people described trust with a trace of caution. The disappearance had rewired assumptions, teaching a lesson that lingered long after the specifics had faded. Inside correctional walls, time did what it always does, compressing identity into routine, reducing life to schedules and counts and the measured passing of days. The man's world shrank, but his silence did not. He maintained it with almost ritual discipline, declining opportunities to speak, to clarify, to complicate the story that had been built around him. Some guards believed the silence was pride. Others thought it was fear, the knowledge that words, once released, can never be contained again. Investigators revisited him less frequently now, their questions softened by realism rather than hope. They knew the odds. Confessions in cases like this rarely come unprompted, and when they do, they are often partial, self-serving, designed to shift blame or minimize responsibility. Still, they tried because persistence is a reflex, because unresolved absence is an itch that never quite fades. They brought maps, photographs, aerial images of places that had changed shape over time, watching closely for involuntary reactions. They found none that could be proven. The family's advocacy took on a different form. They spoke not just for her, but for others, lending their experience to campaigns for missing persons, for better preservation of evidence, for the resources cold cases require if they are ever to warm again. They learned the language of policy, of funding, of reform, turning private grief into public pressure. It was not closure, but it was purpose, and purpose offered a way to keep moving. Public memory proved fickle, but not empty. Anniversaries prompted brief flares of attention, articles that summarized years into paragraphs, documentaries that reconstructed the night with ominous music and careful pacing. Each retelling reinforced certain images: the open door, the quiet street, the small piece of fabric that had changed everything. Other details blurred, receded, became less certain. Memory, like evidence, selects what it can carry. Debate continued, quieter now but persistent. Was the conviction enough? Had the jury seen what it needed to see, or what it wanted to see after years of waiting? Legal scholars dissected the case, using it to explore the boundaries of circumstantial evidence, the ethics of delayed justice. There were no easy conclusions. The case resisted simplification, insisting on nuance where people wanted certainty. Every so often, a rumor would ripple through the community, a whispered suggestion that someone had talked, that something had been found, that the final piece was close. These rumors rarely survived contact with fact, but they revealed something important: the need for an ending. Humans are not built for open loops. We crave conclusions, even painful ones. The absence of her body, of a definitive account, left an open wound that resolution in court could not fully suture. The physical landscape continued to change, erasing and rewriting itself. Landfills expanded. Developments rose where bushland once stood. Each transformation closed doors, even as it opened new ones. Investigators tracked these changes obsessively, knowing that each truckload of soil moved, each foundation poured, reduced the odds that anything would ever be recovered. Time was not neutral. It was actively unhelpful. For the detectives who had first responded that night in 2007, the case became a marker, dividing their careers into before and after. Some remembered the call vividly, the sense that something was wrong before they could articulate why. Others remembered only fragments, the feeling rather than the facts. They spoke of it rarely, but when they did, it carried a gravity that newer cases could not match. The story, stripped of immediacy, began to function as a warning rather than a puzzle. It was cited in training, in briefings, in discussions about the importance of not dismissing the ordinary, of treating the smallest details with respect. The fabric, the door, the half-eaten meal, these became symbols of how easily meaning can be overlooked in the rush of urgency. And through it all, the central absence remained, unchanged by years, debates, or verdicts. A woman who left her house and never returned, her final steps unaccounted for, her story told by others, reconstructed from shadows. The case had moved as far as it could within the limits of proof, and still it stopped short of the truth everyone wanted most. In the end, the cold case did not end. It settled. It became part of the city's background, a low-frequency hum that could be ignored most days, but never entirely silenced. It reminded those who listened that justice can arrive late and incomplete, that answers can coexist with questions, and that some mysteries, even when officially solved, continue to breathe, quietly, in the spaces they leave behind. The case slipped into a different phase of life, one defined less by action than by interpretation, where meaning was drawn not from new evidence, but from the long shadow cast by what had already been decided. Files were requested under Freedom of Information laws, redactions scrutinized like clues, timelines rearranged by amateur analysts convinced the official story still hid something essential. Online forums pulsed with speculation, some thoughtful, some reckless, all driven by the same hunger that had fueled the investigation from the start, the need to know. Former detectives were interviewed years apart, their recollections aligning in broad strokes but diverging in detail, each version shaped by memory's erosion and by the knowledge of how the story ended in court. They spoke of instinct, of moments that felt wrong before they could be explained, of the uneasy sense that the truth had been standing in plain sight all along. None claimed certainty. Experience had taught them to distrust it. The evidence itself took on a kind of afterlife, preserved in climate-controlled rooms, cataloged and protected long after its practical value had peaked. Students and specialists examined it as a case study, marveling at how something so small could carry so much weight. The fabric became almost mythic, a symbol of delayed revelation, of how the future can reach back and reframe the past. It was discussed less as an object and more as an idea, that nothing is ever truly inert. The man remained where he was, aging into a quieter anonymity, his story fixed while the world around him evolved. Appeals were filed and denied, language sharpened and blunted by repetition. Each legal maneuver briefly reopened the wound, forcing everyone connected to the case to revisit arguments they knew by heart. Each denial reinforced the same conclusion without adding anything new. Finality approached asymptotically, never quite arriving, never fully retreating. The family marked time differently now, not by court dates or search updates, but by personal milestones that carried her absence like an extra weight. Weddings, graduations, holidays, each event a reminder of who was missing from the frame. They spoke of her in the present tense sometimes, not as denial, but as resistance, a refusal to let a legal outcome define the limits of her existence. Memory became an act of defiance. Occasionally, someone would come forward claiming a sudden recollection, a detail dislodged by a documentary or a news article, a memory that had waited years for the right context. Investigators listened, assessed, followed up when necessary. Most accounts collapsed under scrutiny. A few lingered just long enough to raise hope before dissolving into ambiguity. The pattern repeated, so often it became familiar, a cycle of anticipation and restraint. The city itself changed character as decades passed, becoming denser, louder, more anonymous. New residents arrived with no knowledge of what had happened on that quiet street in 2007. For them, the story was just another entry in a list of crimes, stripped of immediacy. For longtime locals, it remained personal, a reminder of a time when safety had felt simpler, when the idea of vanishing seemed implausible. Media revisits grew more reflective, less urgent, framing the case as a meditation on time rather than a mystery demanding resolution. Writers focused on the gap between disappearance and discovery, on how justice can be both delayed and decisive, on the cost of waiting. The tone softened, But the unease remained, threaded through every retelling like a warning not to get too comfortable with conclusions. Behind the scenes, technology continued its quiet march. New methods promised new insights, not necessarily for this case, but for others like it. The hope persisted that one day, a technique not yet invented might extract meaning from what currently seemed silent. It was a long shot, acknowledged as such, but cold cases teach a particular kind of patience, the belief that impossibility is often temporary. And so the story endured, not frozen, but suspended, held in a state between resolution and mystery. It existed in court records and family albums, in academic journals and late-night conversations, a narrative that refused to settle into a single shape. The case had been solved in the eyes of the law, yet it remained emotionally unfinished, a reminder that truth is not always a destination, but a process that continues long after the verdict is read. Time did what no verdict could ever do. It dulled outrage without erasing doubt, softened anger without granting peace. The case slipped further into history, no longer fresh enough to shock, not old enough to be forgotten, suspended in that uncomfortable middle space where unresolved stories tend to live. It was referenced less as news and more as precedent, a marker others pointed to when asking how long justice can wait before it changes shape. Inside the system, the file remained active in name only, reopened periodically by policy rather than promise. Each review followed the same ritual. Evidence rechecked, notes reread, conclusions reaffirmed. Nothing new emerged, but the act itself mattered. It signaled refusal to abandon the missing, an institutional acknowledgement that disappearance does not expire simply because time has passed. The man's health began to decline, quietly, predictably, the body responding to age and confinement with mechanical inevitability. This shift introduced a new urgency, unspoken but palpable. Investigators knew what mortality means to unsolved details. Confessions rarely come early. They arrive late, if at all, when leverage has evaporated and legacy becomes a concern. They adjusted their approach accordingly, less confrontational, more reflective, offering space rather than pressure. They spoke to him about memory, about how stories calcify if they aren't told, how silence can outlive truth but not replace it. They mentioned the family, not as a tactic but as a fact, a constant presence unaffected by legal outcomes. He listened. He asked for water. He said nothing that could be written down as confession. Silence again did its work. The public noticed the shift too, subtle changes in how the case was discussed. Sympathy expanded, not just for the missing woman and her family, but for the complexity of the situation itself. People acknowledged aloud what they had long felt privately, that solving a case on paper doesn't guarantee emotional resolution, that justice and understanding are related but not identical. The conversation matured, trading certainty for honesty. Anniversaries passed with quieter rituals. A candlelight vigil held by fewer people but with deeper familiarity. Names spoken softly, without expectation. The absence was no longer shocking. It was integrated, carried forward as part of collective memory. This integration did not diminish loss. It stabilized it, allowing grief to coexist with daily life rather than interrupt it. In professional circles, the case influenced protocol. Evidence preservation standards tightened. Minor items once dismissed gained new importance. Training emphasized patience, warning against the temptation to discard what seems irrelevant. The fabric, small and stubborn, became shorthand for that lesson, cited without explanation, understood immediately by those who had studied the file. The city's relationship with the story changed as well. It became less about fear and more about vigilance, less about mystery and more about responsibility. People talked about looking out for one another, about noticing routines, about not assuming that normality guarantees safety. The disappearance reshaped behavior in ways too subtle to measure, but too persistent to ignore. Late one year, a letter arrived at the investigative unit, handwritten, unremarkable in appearance, its contents cautious and indirect. It did not claim knowledge. It did not confess. It hinted. It referenced a place long dismissed, a location that had once seemed too altered to matter. The team debated its credibility, weighed hope against experience, and ultimately decided to act, not because they believed it would solve everything, but because ignoring it would feel like surrender. The search that followed was careful, methodical, shielded from media attention. Equipment moved in quietly. Soil was tested. Structures were scanned. Nothing definitive surfaced, but the effort itself rippled outward, reminding the public that the case was not as dormant as it appeared. The absence stirred again, briefly, before settling back into its familiar shape. As the year closed, the case stood unchanged in its essentials, but altered in its meaning. It was no longer just about what happened in 2007. It was about what happens after, about endurance, about how communities carry unresolved truth without collapsing under its weight. The story had grown beyond its origin, becoming a study in persistence rather than a puzzle demanding a final answer. And still, somewhere between documented fact and lived experience, the missing woman remained exactly that, missing. Not found, not forgotten, not fully understood. The cold case had been solved in name, argued in court, absorbed into policy and memory, yet it continued to resist the one thing everyone wanted most: a complete account, a final certainty, a moment where the story could stop asking questions and finally rest. The quiet that followed felt heavier than any announcement, heavier than any verdict or denial, because it carried the understanding that the window for absolute truth was narrowing, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, like a tide pulling away from shore. Investigators felt it in the way meetings ended sooner, in the way phrases like unlikely and insufficient crept more often into reports. The case was no longer racing against ignorance. It was racing against time itself. Inside the prison, routine began to fracture. Medical appointments replaced work details. Days were punctuated by tests and waiting rather than schedules and counts. The man's body betrayed him in ways his words never had, and with that betrayal came a subtle shift in power. Detectives returned again, not with threats or promises, but with the plain acknowledgement of reality. They spoke about finality, about how history tends to remember silence harshly, about how the absence of explanation often becomes its own verdict. They asked simple questions this time. Not what happened, not why, just where the night ended, where the story stopped moving. He listened, eyes clouded with something that might have been fatigue, might have been calculation. He closed them for a moment, opened them again, and said nothing. The silence landed differently now, no longer defiant, more resigned, as if he understood that withholding had lost its strategic value but could not bring himself to relinquish it. The family was informed of his condition in the careful language institutions use when they don't want to offer false hope. They processed the news privately, knowing what it implied without needing it spelled out. The possibility that he might take the remaining answers with him settled like a weight they had learned to carry too well. They spoke among themselves about what closure really meant, about whether knowing everything would change anything, about how much of their grief was tied to questions that might never be answered. Public discussion flared briefly, reignited by speculation about last-minute confessions, about deathbed revelations that could finally resolve the narrative. Commentators debated whether the system should do more to extract truth before it was lost, whether moral obligation could be enforced where legal leverage had expired. The debate produced more heat than light, circling the same unresolved tension between justice and humanity. Behind the scenes, contingency plans were drawn. If he spoke, protocols were ready. If he didn't, statements were prepared. The machinery of resolution stood poised, aware that it might never be used. This readiness itself was a kind of vigil, an acknowledgement that the story deserved attention even at its quietest point. As months passed, the man's health fluctuated, improving just enough to sustain uncertainty. Each improvement delayed the reckoning, stretched the waiting further. Investigators checked in, less often now, more gently. There were no confrontations left to stage. Only presence. Only the steady reminder that someone was still listening, still willing to hear whatever might finally be said. The city watched from a distance, its attention divided among newer crises, newer stories. Yet the case resurfaced in unexpected ways, mentioned in opinion pieces about unsolved disappearances, in conversations about the limits of forensic certainty. It had become a reference for something larger than itself, an example of how even the most persistent efforts can stop short of total understanding. One evening, the family gathered without cameras, without statements, marking another year since 2007 had first broken their lives into before and after. They spoke of ordinary things, shared food, laughed briefly, guiltily, then let the silence return. The absence sat with them as it always had, unchanged by legal outcomes or medical updates. It was the one constant in a story defined by uncertainty. When news finally came, it did not arrive with revelation. There was no confession, no coordinates offered, no final piece handed over at the last moment. The man's condition worsened, then stabilized again, dragging the ending out, denying its shape or meaning. The opportunity for answers hovered, always just out of reach, like a word on the tip of the tongue that refuses to be spoken. And in that prolonged in-between, the case reached a strange equilibrium. It no longer demanded action, yet it refused to rest. It existed as a reminder that some truths are not seized, only surrendered, and that surrender is never guaranteed. The story had come full circle, returning to the same place it began, a quiet night, an unanswered door, and the enduring knowledge that even when the law speaks, silence can still have the final word. The end, when it finally arrived, did not announce itself as an ending. It came softly, wrapped in routine updates and carefully worded statements, the kind that lower expectations even as they deliver finality. The man died, without speaking. No confession. No map drawn from memory. No gesture toward the place where the night of 2007 had finished what it started. The silence that had defined the case from the beginning held to the very last breath, intact, unbroken, absolute. Officials released the news with restraint, emphasizing process over emotion, outcome over implication. The conviction stood. The record remained unchanged. The case, they said, was closed. But closure is a word that belongs to systems, not to people, and for those who had lived inside the story for years, the announcement landed with a dull, familiar weight rather than shock. They had prepared for this ending even as they hoped against it. The family received the news privately. There were no cameras, no statements crafted for public consumption, just a quiet reckoning with what the silence now meant. Any remaining chance of hearing the truth directly was gone, dissolved into permanence. They sat with that reality, not for the first time but for the last, understanding that some questions had crossed a threshold beyond which answers no longer existed. In the days that followed, speculation surged briefly, then receded. Commentators asked whether the system had failed to extract the full truth, whether something more could have been done. Others argued that the conviction itself was enough, that justice does not require completeness to be valid. The debate circled familiar ground, offering no new insights, only confirmation of what the case had always illustrated, that truth and proof do not always align neatly. Investigators closed their final notes, documenting the end of all viable leads. The file, thick and worn, was returned to storage one last time, its contents unchanged but its status irrevocably altered. No further interviews would be conducted. No additional pressure applied. The search, unofficially, was over. What remained was record, memory, and the quiet knowledge of limits reached. The city absorbed the news with subdued recognition. There were no vigils this time, no renewed urgency, only a collective acknowledgement that the story had settled into its final form. It would not resolve further. It would not surprise anyone again. It would live on as it was, incomplete, unsettling, resistant to neat summary. Over time, the case found its place in the long catalog of unresolved absences, cited not for its mystery alone, but for what it revealed about patience, persistence, and restraint. It became a lesson in how far evidence can take you, and where it must stop, in how technology can resurrect old questions without guaranteeing old answers, in how justice can be real and still feel insufficient. The house on the quiet street remained just a house. The door remained just a door. The ordinary details that once framed the beginning of the story returned fully to ordinariness, stripped of immediacy, but not of meaning. People passed without slowing now, unaware or uninterested, the way cities always move on. Only those who knew carried the weight forward. And somewhere beyond documentation and debate, beyond verdicts and appeals, the missing woman remained exactly what she had always been since that night: unresolved. Not reduced to evidence. Not contained by conclusions. Her story ended without a final sentence, without the certainty that so often accompanies crime narratives. It ended instead with an absence that refused to be filled, a silence that outlasted every attempt to break it. This was the legacy of the case. Not the arrest, not the conviction, but the enduring reminder that some truths are partial, some justice incomplete, and some stories never truly finish. The cold case had been solved, declared, archived. Yet the question at its heart remained, echoing quietly through years that would continue without an answer, a final, unspoken line hanging in the air, waiting for a voice that would never come. The silence after the verdict did not feel like closure. It felt like a held breath that never fully escaped the city, because even when the courtroom doors closed and the word solved began appearing in headlines, Sydney still carried the weight of everything that had come before, the years when nothing made sense and no one knew who to fear, and now, in the aftermath, people walked the same streets with a different awareness, as if the pavement itself remembered what had been buried beneath it. The name of the case was spoken less often, but when it was, voices dropped, because resolution does not erase trauma, it reframes it, and the long-lost evidence that triggered the arrest did not magically restore what was taken. It simply tore open the past one final time and forced everyone to look inside. Investigators admitted, quietly, that the case had changed them, that they still dreamed of the early missteps, the missed calls, the boxes of evidence left untouched as technology raced ahead, and families wondered aloud what justice really meant when it arrived decades late, wrapped in legal language and flashing cameras. The community learned that answers can be more unsettling than questions, because certainty leaves no room for hope, and hope, however painful, had once been easier to carry than the truth. In living rooms across the city, people replayed the story, the disappearance, the false leads, the years of nothing, and they asked themselves how many other files were still waiting, how many other lives were paused in limbo, how many other cold cases slept behind locked doors, waiting for one overlooked detail to wake them. The city moved on, as cities always do, but it moved differently now, more cautious, more aware of how thin the line is between ordinary nights and irreversible moments. And somewhere, in the quiet after the headlines faded, the case continued to echo, not as a mystery anymore, but as a reminder that even when the truth finally surfaces, it never arrives clean, never arrives whole, and never truly lets go of the people it touched. Time did not close the file, it only pushed it further back on the shelf, and even after the case was stamped as finished, there were questions that refused to stay quiet, questions that surfaced in late-night radio calls, in comment sections, in the pauses between sentences when people said the victim's name and then stopped, unsure how to finish the thought. Because a solved cold case does not end a story, it changes its shape, and in Sydney the shape was jagged, uneven, full of edges that still cut. Former detectives would later admit that the arrest felt less like triumph and more like confrontation, a forced reckoning with every moment they had stood in that same evidence room years earlier, convinced they were running out of time, not knowing that time itself would become the only thing they had left. The long-lost evidence, once dismissed as insignificant, now sat under bright lights, photographed, catalogued, transformed into the centerpiece of a narrative no one could escape, and the realization settled in slowly, painfully, that the truth had always been there, waiting for someone to look at it the right way. In the neighborhoods tied to the case, people marked their memories differently now. That bus stop was no longer just a bus stop. That alley was no longer just a shortcut. Ordinary places carried a second meaning, one invisible but heavy, and parents told their children stories not to scare them, but to explain why caution mattered, why the city they loved had shadows they could not afford to ignore. Journalists moved on to new headlines, new crises, but some kept the file bookmarked, returning to it late at night, rereading old notes, aware that the most disturbing detail was not the crime itself, but how easily it had slipped through the cracks. The accused sat in custody, no longer a rumor, no longer a silhouette, but a person with a face, a voice, a history that investigators dissected piece by piece, searching for warning signs they might have missed, patterns that only made sense in retrospect. And yet, even with a name attached, even with charges laid bare, the question lingered in the background like static. Why did it take so long? That question had no single answer, only fragments, human error, limited technology, assumptions hardened into blind spots, and the uncomfortable truth that cold cases are not frozen in time. They are slowly shaped by neglect. As years passed, the story settled into Sydney's collective memory, cited in lectures, referenced in documentaries, used as proof that persistence could pay off, but also as a cautionary tale about complacency. For the family, the world's attention faded faster than their grief, and closure, that word so often promised, revealed itself as a myth, because knowing what happened did not soften the loss, it sharpened it. And so the case lived on in a different way, no longer as an unanswered mystery, but as an open wound that had finally been named, reminding everyone who listened that some truths arrive too late to heal, and some echoes never stop, even when the story is declared over. Even now, years after the last gavel strike and the final press conference, the case still surfaces in unexpected places, not as breaking news, but as a low, persistent murmur, a reference point when another disappearance flashes across screens and someone inevitably asks whether this one, too, will become a cold case left to age in silence. The investigators who remained speak about it differently now, their voices slower, more measured, because they understand something they didn't before, that every open file is a living thing, changing as people forget, retire, move away, die, taking pieces of the truth with them. They remember how close they were without realizing it, how the crucial details sat among thousands of others, indistinguishable until time and technology sharpened its edges, and that knowledge has followed them into every case since, a quiet pressure to look again, and then one more time. In the city, the victim's name appears occasionally on memorials, on anniversaries marked not by crowds, but by a handful of people standing still, listening to traffic rush past as if nothing ever happened there, and that contrast is the most unsettling part, how life absorbs tragedy and keeps moving, leaving only faint impressions for those who know where to look. The family learned to live with two realities at once, the official story neatly summarized in court records, and the private one, messy, emotional, full of moments no document could capture, the last phone call, the unanswered messages, the years spent scanning faces in public places, wondering if the past might suddenly step out of the present. What remains most haunting is not the violence itself, but the space around it, the long stretch of time when answers existed but were unreachable, when suspicion drifted without direction and trust eroded quietly, almost invisibly. People who once felt safe realized that certainty is fragile, that danger does not always announce itself, and that the absence of answers can be as corrosive as the answers themselves. The case became a reference in training rooms and strategy meetings, a reminder that progress often comes too late for those who need it most, and that justice, delayed long enough, changes everyone it touches. And so the story settles into its final form, not clean, not complete, but undeniably real, a solved case that still feels unfinished, a chapter closed with pages missing. In the quiet moments, when the city's noise fades and memory takes over, the question is no longer who did it or how they were caught, but what it cost to wait so long, and whether the next file marked cold will be allowed to sleep, or whether someone, somewhere, will hear the echo of this one and decide that waiting is the most dangerous choice of all. There is a moment, rarely spoken about, when even the most hardened observers admit that the case never truly ended. It only slipped into a quieter phase, where its influence spread without a name attached to it. Policies were adjusted, procedures rewritten, old evidence rooms reopened not with urgency but with unease, because everyone involved understood the implication. If this could happen once, it could happen again. The file became a shadow companion to future investigations, its lessons whispered rather than announced, shaping instincts, altering decisions, making hesitation feel dangerous. For the city, the case transformed into a reference point for loss measured in years, not days, a story parents remembered when their children stayed out late, a reminder journalists carried when a new disappearance crossed their desks and the temptation to move on came too quickly. The phrase cold case itself sounded different now, less abstract, heavier, charged with the knowledge that behind those words lived real people suspended in unresolved grief, waiting for a knock on the door that might come decades too late. Those closest to the victim learned to navigate a world that insisted the story was finished, while their own sense of time remained fractured, anchored to the moment everything stopped. They spoke of justice with caution, aware that the verdict answered questions but did not restore balance, and that the long delay had carved something permanent into their lives, a reminder that survival does not always feel like victory. The community watched them with a mixture of sympathy and discomfort, because their presence was proof that resolution does not equal repair. As the years continued to pass, the case faded from headlines entirely, replaced by newer tragedies, newer mysteries, each one claiming its share of attention before inevitably risking the same quiet neglect. Yet beneath that cycle, the echo remained, subtle but persistent, urging those who remembered to resist complacency, to question assumptions, to return to the evidence one more time. In that echo lived the true legacy of the case, not the arrest or the conviction, but the understanding that time is both an enemy and a witness, capable of erasing details while preserving truths that wait patiently to be uncovered. And so the story ends where it began, not with certainty, but with awareness, a city changed by what it learned too late, a system forever marked by what it almost missed, and a reminder that some cases may be declared solved, but their shadows stretch far beyond the final line, following everyone who hears them into the quiet, unresolved spaces where the past refuses to stay buried. The truth is that the case kept speaking long after everyone stopped listening for it, slipping into conversations that had nothing to do with crime, surfacing in the way people hesitated before trusting official timelines, in the way skepticism became a reflex rather than a reaction. Retired officers carried it with them into quieter lives, finding that distance did not soften the memories, it sharpened them, because time stripped away excuses and left only the moments that mattered, the decisions that could not be revisited. Some admitted, in rare unguarded moments, that the hardest part was not the years without answers, but the realization that certainty had been possible much earlier, that the line between unsolved and solved had been thinner than anyone wanted to believe. In archives and databases, the case remained active in a technical sense, cited, cross-referenced, used as a benchmark for what persistence looked like when patience ran out. Students studied it as history, unaware that for others it was still a lived experience, still something that could tighten a chest or interrupt sleep without warning. The victim's absence became a constant presence, a reminder that stories labeled complete can still feel unfinished to those who carry them internally, where no ruling ever reaches. The city itself bore the mark in subtler ways. Surveillance cameras multiplied. Neighborhood watches grew more vigilant. Familiar streets acquired an unspoken awareness, as if memory had rewired perception, teaching people to notice what they once ignored. And yet, despite all of that, uncertainty remained, because safety built on hindsight is never absolute, and the lesson learned from waiting too long is not easily forgotten. What lingered most was the understanding that answers do not arrive all at once. They accumulate, fragile and incomplete, shaped by human attention and neglect in equal measure. The case stood as proof that silence can be misleading, that the absence of movement does not mean the absence of truth, only the absence of someone willing or able to see it. And so, even now, whenever a file is marked cold, whenever a disappearance slips past the first rush of concern, there is an unspoken reference to this story, a quiet question hovering in the background, How much time will pass before someone looks again, and what will be lost while they wait? By the time the case reached its 17th year in public memory, it had become something more abstract, less about a single night, and more about the collective cost of delay, a symbol invoked whenever another investigation stalled, and the word cold threatened to settle in. People no longer argued over the facts. They argued over meaning, over what the story demanded of those who heard it and chose to look away. Because beneath every retelling was the same uncomfortable realization. This was not an isolated failure. It was a mirror, reflecting how easily urgency fades when answers don't come quickly. Those who revisited the file noticed details they had once skimmed past, small inconsistencies, overlooked routines, the quiet signals that only stand out when the ending is known. It raised an unsettling possibility that other cases, still unsolved, were already holding their solutions in plain sight, waiting not for new technology, but for renewed attention. The idea spread slowly, changing the culture of investigation in ways that could not be measured in arrests or convictions, but in the refusal to let silence be mistaken for resolution. For the family, the passing years softened nothing, but they learned to live alongside the weight, carrying it into a future that never fully detached from the past. They spoke less about what happened and more about what was lost in the waiting, the birthdays without answers, the seasons that passed while hope thinned and hardened into endurance. Their experience became a quiet warning that time does not heal when uncertainty is allowed to linger. It only rearranges the pain. And so the case endures, not because of its notoriety, but because of its lesson, a reminder etched into institutional memory and personal conscience alike. It whispers that justice delayed is not neutral, that every year unanswered reshapes lives in ways no verdict can undo. When new cases emerge and the cycle begins again, there is a moment, brief but crucial, when someone remembers the story and chooses persistence over patience. In that choice lives the only real ending this case will ever have, not closure, but vigilance, the refusal to let another truth wait quietly in the dark while time moves on without it. Long after the story stopped being told in full, fragments of it began to surface in other narratives, echoes embedded in new investigations that followed eerily similar paths, a missing person here, an evidence bag rediscovered there, each one stirring a faint recognition that felt uncomfortably familiar. The case had trained people to listen differently, to distrust the calm that settles when nothing happens, because inactivity, they learned, can be the loudest warning of all. Detectives spoke of it as a presence rather than a memory, something that hovered over their desks when leads dried up, reminding them that the absence of progress did not mean the absence of truth. In academic circles and policy meetings, the file was dissected not for its drama but for its silences, the years where procedure replaced curiosity and routine dulled instinct. It became an argument against inevitability, proof that cases do not grow cold on their own. They are cooled by distraction, by fatigue, by the quiet consensus that all reasonable avenues have been exhausted. That realization unsettled those who heard it, because it suggested responsibility where comfort once lived, and responsibility is harder to carry than mystery. The city continued to change, skylines shifting, neighborhoods rebranded, old streets renamed, yet the locations tied to the case resisted erasure, lingering in collective awareness as places where time had stalled. New residents passed through unaware, while others slowed their steps, remembering headlines from years before, remembering how easily an ordinary moment had become irreversible. Memory proved more durable than concrete, embedding itself into habits and caution, shaping behavior without ever announcing why. What remained unresolved was not the question of guilt, but the question of trust, how long a community could believe in systems that moved so slowly, and what it meant to rely on answers that arrived after the damage was already done. The case offered no comfort on that front, only a stark reminder that truth, when delayed, carries consequences that ripple outward long after it is finally acknowledged. And so the story persists, not as a caution frozen in the past, but as a living reference, activated whenever momentum falters and doubt creeps in. It asks, without speaking, whether waiting is a choice or a failure, and whether the next case labeled cold will be allowed to drift into obscurity or pulled back into the light before time hardens uncertainty into permanence. Eventually, the case stopped being measured in years and started being measured in influence, in the subtle shifts it caused long after the final documents were filed away. Investigators who had never worked it directly still felt its weight, inheriting procedures shaped by its failures, taught to question the quiet moments, to distrust the ease of moving on. The story became less about what happened and more about what almost didn't, a near miss that haunted every stalled lead and every decision to postpone a follow-up until tomorrow. In public memory, the details blurred, faces and dates fading, but the core sensation remained intact, the awareness that certainty is fragile and that systems built to protect can falter without constant pressure. People no longer recalled every twist of the investigation, but they remembered how long it took, and that alone was enough to unsettle them. It reshaped how communities reacted to new cases, replacing initial shock with a quieter, more sustained vigilance, an understanding that attention, once withdrawn, is rarely restored in full. The family's story continued in parallel, separate from official timelines, carried forward in routines built around absence. They marked time differently, anniversaries layered over one another, hope transforming into something steadier and less visible. When asked about the case, they spoke carefully, aware that public fascination ebbs while private loss does not, and that resolution, when it comes late, is something you learn to live beside rather than inside. What lingered in the background was a single unresolved tension, not about facts, but about responsibility. Who watches the watchers when momentum fades? Who decides when enough effort has been spent? The case offered no simple answers, only evidence that neglect rarely announces itself as such. It arrives disguised as patience, as procedure, as the assumption that nothing more can be done. And so, even now, when another investigation slows and the word cold hovers unspoken, this story resurfaces in instinct if not in name. It reminds those who remember that waiting has consequences, that silence can mislead, and that the most dangerous moment in any case is not the crime itself, but the point at which everyone agrees, quietly, to stop looking. By the 20th retelling, the case no longer needed specifics to be understood. Its gravity communicated through pauses, through the way voices slowed when someone mentioned how long it took before anything moved at all. It had become shorthand for a particular kind of failure, not dramatic or sudden, but gradual, built from reasonable decisions that accumulated into irreversible delay. Officers spoke about it as a warning embedded in their training, an example of how certainty can be manufactured by repetition, how assumptions harden when left unchallenged. In the public sphere, trust recalibrated itself quietly. People listened to official statements with a new filter, not cynicism exactly, but caution, a learned habit of waiting to see whether urgency would last beyond the first wave of attention. The case had taught them that time does not just test evidence, it tests commitment, and that the real measure of an investigation is not how loudly it begins, but how persistently it continues once the noise fades. The physical remnants of the story thinned with each passing year. Buildings changed hands. Offices were renovated. Paper files were digitized and stored in systems few ever accessed. Yet the emotional residue proved harder to erase, because it lived in behavior, in the extra call made before closing a file, in the reluctance to dismiss a detail as insignificant. These were the aftershocks, invisible but enduring, evidence that the case had altered instinct as much as procedure. For those directly affected, time remained complicated. They spoke less often, not because the weight had lifted, but because repetition offered no relief. The narrative the world remembered was clean compared to the reality they lived with, a story with an ending imposed on an experience that never truly concluded. They learned that remembrance by others is episodic, while loss is continuous, and that no official resolution can synchronize those two timelines. What the case ultimately left behind was not confidence, but vigilance, a recognition that answers are fragile and that momentum, once lost, is difficult to recover. It existed now as a quiet benchmark, a reminder invoked whenever patience threatened to become indifference. And in that role, it continued to serve its only remaining purpose, pressing against the collective conscience, insisting that the cost of waiting be remembered before another truth is allowed to drift out of reach.